problem.
I'm going to wait for Andy to get back. So why don't you, if you could, just, we know a little bit about you guys already, so
Sure.
we've had a lot of information. You could just tell us a little bit about yourself and about how, and what are the reasons why? Why do you want to do this?
You want to wait for Andrew, or do you want
No,
me
no, I
to?
think that's what
Okay, for me, I have been an Andover resident for 25 of the 50 years
you're a
that
new kid then.
I've been, living, and was happy 5 years ago to move back to Andover with my family, so I was very excited about that opportunity. I've always been a proud resident of Andover. Its history, I would say, but over the course following over the last 5 years, discussions about OPEB and pension liabilities and things like that. Also, as an accountant, those are issues that I take seriously. And my expectation, I've sent the board a year or so ago a letter to that effect, but my expectation is, and I've heard it echoed at least 2 or 3 times tonight, that I expect Andover to take the lead in our area, whether that's northern Massachusetts or all over Massachusetts, when we're comparing ourselves against other cities in terms of infrastructure, schools, fiscal responsibility, and things of that nature. So I think I have a unique background that qualifies me for the position. I've started my career working as an accountant for an investment fund. I learned about investment management, how investment allocation affects funds, and what the impact of a negative allocation is on the overall health of the fund. I'm also a certified public accountant. There I've audited pension funds, very familiar with let's say just all of the assumptions that actuaries use in valuing funds and those items. For the last 20 years I've been a CFO of a group of manufacturing companies where I've been the primary responsible person for setting all of the standards for our 401k health and benefit plans. So in that regard, my family history is one of a good deal of volunteer service, and so when I found out this position was coming available, it certainly is something that I'd like to take my expertise and put it to work for the town, the retirees, and everybody affected by the pension plan.
Good. Let me ask you one more question, and then I'll open up to the boards. What is your perception of the duties of the retirement board? How do you think it works there? What were your responsibilities?
Okay, well,
I just want to know what your perception
well,
is.
my perception, I think it's legally written. You're a fiduciary of the on behalf of the current and future retirees of the town, to make sure that there's a stable plan in place and that the fund is stable, and that we can meet the requirements that they have for current and future benefits. So I think that's statutory, but I think really the primary goal is to make sure that the promises that the town is making to current and future retirees is able to be met, and that has a lot to do with these actuarial assumptions like discount rates, and there's a lot of detail in there. But in the end, I have a lot of friends, no family, but friends around town who are public employees, and it's my expectation that we make sure that the town is funding those plans properly, so that there's not going to be a lapse or a reduction in benefits in the future. I think it's a tough question to tackle, but somebody's got to do it. So I think I'm ready to do it.
Good. Okay, why don't we go through the board? Do you want to start, Bob?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Workman, for your interest in the position. With your background, your financial background, I'd like to know you've had a chance to take a look at the numbers for our current retirement system.
Yes, correct.
And I'm just curious how would you assess the current condition of Andover's retirement system, the financial condition?
Okay, so I'll preface this by saying I've looked at a number of different pieces of information from the Peer Act reports, which are every 3 years, to the current board minutes from the retirement board, and there's certain presentations that have been put to the board. So there's, depending on how you value the fund and what date, whether you use the Peer Act report or the most recent data, we're at an unfunded liability if we consider the retirement board's estimates of around $130 million. The town, because of government accounting standards, has put on its balance sheet about $161 million of liabilities as of the last report. And so really, in terms of the status of the fund, I think the most telling item is that 15 years ago, just about 2000, the fund was nearly 80 to 85% funded, fully funded. So there's only 15% deficiency in the funding at that point. And over the course of the 15 years, we've got to a section where we're anywhere between 45 and 50% funded. And so my impression is that's not a good track record. And what that has done, really, it's misled the residents of the town in terms of what the obligations that were signed up for under collective bargaining and those things. So I think, I think it's a little bit drastic, where we are. However, the retirement board has put in some plans. They've got a funding plan to 2032. I don't think it's realistic, but it's in place, and it's going to have a real impact on town budgets for the next 15 years. The funding right now is $9.5 million this year, I think, and over the next 15 years from now, I think the annual funding amount for the town will be close between 25 and 30 million.
Correct.
The current rate. So, to answer, I guess put it in a summary, I think the trend is not good. But I think there are things that can be done. There can be positive moves that can be made to improve the health of the fund. And I think the biggest thing is just to make the Board of Selectmen and through the budget process, making sure that the retirement board is properly valuing the liabilities and setting the proper funding schedule, because the retirement board set a 2032 funding schedule, and they could, by law, go to 2040 funding schedule. And the truth is, as far as I can see, chances are that the legislature will finally act sometime in the near future and postpone the requirement for a 2040 funding schedule, because I don't think, I've looked at the 104 different retirement boards, and there's a large percentage under the 60% funding rate.
And you have a question?
I'm going to come back to it.
Okay. Alex, you have anything?
Just under disclosure, I've contacted each of the candidates by phone and had some conversation with them just to try to respect everybody's time. So I spent, Mr. Workman, thank you for putting your hat in the ring and for spending some time with me on the phone. My quick question is there one thing that you would put at the highest priority if you were to be on the board?
I would say if my current snapshot or assessment would be there might be 3 or 4 things that the board is able to do to change things, but to be honest, first and foremost would be to look at the discount rate that the retirement board, they moved it from 7.75% a few years ago as of the last Peer Act report. It's moved now to 7.25%. The town is using 6.25% for its financial statements. And so the truth of the matter is, whether we could argue whether that should be 5.75 or 5.5, but I think that the most important thing is to have an honest discussion with the board about what that discount rate should be and get a more realistic annual funding plan through whether it's 2032 or 2040.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, you have a question?
Yeah, you described yourself as having a fiduciary duty to retirees, and first of all, let me tell you, I'm a lawyer, so my question for you is, how do you see your actions on the board as representing that fiduciary duty? Like, how would you view things in light of your fiduciary duty to the retirees, current and future?
Did she put you under oath? I didn't.
I'm not sure, but I'll speak openly and truthfully. I know, I'm not shy anymore. Getting up in years. So,
Trying to lighten it up a little. That's all.
Realistically, you have a fiduciary duty to these people, and one of the things that I reviewed as part of going through the literature, the board sent me some literature of normal attendee at town meetings, so I'm aware of all of the work that was done on OPEB. I think realistically, what you want to do for the retirees is simply not make the current funding get to a crisis level where you could easily forecast when you look at the 104 pension systems in Massachusetts, and you can go further if you went nationwide, to find out that there are cities and towns right now who are going through a municipal bankruptcy. And the result of those municipal bankruptcies is, there was one in Rhode Island, there's one in California, Detroit is, I would say, probably the most well-known. But the truth is, in all of those bankruptcies, the retirees take the hit. Now, whether they take it as a matter of reduced pension benefits, or whether they take it as either a reduction or a complete elimination of the OPEB liabilities that cities and towns have to the retirees, either way, without an honest discussion about what the funding is, you're putting at risk future retirees' benefits. Okay, if we don't address the true crisis. So my fiduciary duty to the retirees, current and future, is current retirees probably, the fund is funded to a point where it's no problem. But future retirees, people we're hiring as teachers right now, and new policemen and fire, those people, I understand that, for this retirement board, simply only, town employees, not the teachers. They're in a separate bucket, but the circumstances are similar. So for those retirees, my fiduciary responsibility is to make sure we get the funding mechanism right so that there's no reduction of future benefits, and that means no crisis at the town funding level.
All right, my other question is, you seem from your lengthy resume, in addition to being very impressive, to have been wearing a number of hats at the same time. Do you have time to do this? I can tell you, this I do have time for. So I volunteer regularly for other things. I've looked at the time that it takes, current board members, so I've pinged some of the current board members to see what the time, the board is meeting once a month, and then sometimes executive sessions and sometimes interviews. But this is, I would say, so very close to what I do on my corporate side. But as the CEO of my company, I have a very flexible schedule, day-to-day, week-to-week. So, for instance, if you wanted to meet next Tuesday and talk about things, I have the capability to move my schedule around to accommodate the time that's necessary. So I feel I do. Well, I would advise you that as a new member of the board, it takes a lot more time than you think.
I believe that.
At least to do a good job. That's all for my questions.
In listening to you, I think you said there were 3 or 4 things you thought the board could do to help your mission.
Sure.
I think I heard funding schedule to 2040 and discount rate reevaluation. Any other things that you...
Okay, so if I, as I said, through the OPEB process and the recommendations that the OPEB committee made, there are limited things that retirement boards can do in Massachusetts because there are very strict rules at the state legislature level. But there are some things that can be done. So the limits of those things, there are service hour requirements. So let's say right now it's a 20-hour minimum requirement. One potential option would be to move that closer toward 40 hours. I do not want to represent that I've done a detailed analysis of the impact of each of those or the impact of any of them, quite frankly. But what is clear is what could be done. So cost of living increases, which are, not necessarily at the level that the retirement board in Andover has approved over the past 2 or 3 years. Those could be reduced. That could have an impact on the pension. The service requirement, and then the other eligibility requirements that really could be, modified at some level is there are buyback provisions for time to give members in the retirement board more service time where they were not working the minimum requirements. So you could move those, and each one I absolutely have not evaluated the impact of those.
Right, so you're not advocating these? These are
No.
things that you've not-
I'm saying there's a limited, so aside from setting the discount rate, which is really just putting to the town in the forefront the real funding requirement per mass law, and really to get to a reasonably fully funded level, that's the biggest thing. There's no question about that. All of those other things I wouldn't advocate for because I think it requires, that's why we have a 5-person board, and I think that has to be discussed. However, I do know definitively that as selectmen, you have not had, I would say, much cooperation, I don't believe, between the two boards at this point. Now, still, the fiduciary responsibility is very clear. It's to the retirees, current and future. But as I said, if you have a system which is unfunded and will never be funded because it's not possible with the town budgets, then you're really kidding yourself. So there has to be, in order to live with that fiduciary duty, you have to make the two boards work together with the town in order to make it a fully funded plan through whether it's 2032, 2040, or even 2050, depending on how or if the legislature relaxes the requirements.
So as a retirement board member, you will likely be lobbied by many other outside people, groups, whatever. It's a very direct question, and I'd like a very direct answer. Will you be your own man, make your own decisions, and try to understand that it's really important for you to have that individual, or we expect you to have an individual opinion, rather than be influenced by, or overly influenced by. I'm not talking about not gathering information.
Sure.
I'm talking about being influenced.
Well, what I can say is definitive. I will not be influenced. I'm influenced by data. That's how my whole career has been influenced. This is a matter of financial analysis. There is not so much, actuaries make assumptions and things like that. Cities and towns evaluate those assumptions and make decisions based on that. I certainly do not plan on being influenced by outside sources, in making decisions for the retirement board. What I think really the influence comes in taking the two members of the board who are elected by the retirees, and the ex officio member and the other member who is appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and bringing the two together to make common sense. So if all those 4 or 5 things are on the table, let's get a dialogue so that we can move forward with common sense changes that both parties can agree to. Because I think we're doing a disservice to both parties right now by not making movement. We're stagnant, and it's affecting the town, and ultimately, I think it's affecting the retirees because we have a system which is now 40+% funded versus 85% funded.
Right.
So,
Thank you. That was a good direct answer. Thank you. Anything else?
Yes, Mr. Workman, thank you. Mr. Workman reached out to me early last week, and my schedule has been challenged to try
Yeah, sure.
to get
No, I
back with
understand.
him. So, thank you for reaching out. You seem very educated on the topic. Can you share with me how you became so educated on the topic of OPEB, the current state of the retirement board?
well, okay. I would say when I found out that there was this opening, I've done a lot of so as it relates to the numbers specifically of the Andover Retirement Board and the plan. That's been research that I've done over the last few weeks since I sent my resume to the board. In terms of the subject matter, as I said, I've worked and I accounted for an investment fund for a nonprofit, the National Bureau of Economic Research. So I had a lot of experience. That was experience kind of working with investment advisors on investment allocation. So I'm very familiar with that, although that was a long time ago, so it's 25 years ago. As a CPA, when you audit these funds, you have to make determinations about whether the actuarial assumptions are accurate and whether the fund on a private side has to be fully funded. Otherwise, you have a big problem. And as it relates to, so for the last 25 years, this group of companies, so these companies that I've been a part of are all offshoots of one core manufacturing company. So we have a real estate version, and but all of them maintain individual pension plans, health and welfare benefit plans, and so go ahead.
So you mentioned specific changes that could be adopted as policies.
Yes.
Where do those come from? Where did you derive those specific changes?
Yeah, no. Those specifically came through my research of the plan itself. The OPEB in the Finance Committee report last year, the OPEB committee posted a status report of, I think it was, not sure, 30 or 40 recommendations, and where they stood on all of those. And specifically, those OPEB recommendations, as they relate to the pension plan, it indicated whether some of those could be done without legislative action or what things were available to address at the local level. And so I believe that report indicated on the pension plan what the impact would be of each of those. However, I didn't really go into that level of detail, but it's effectively coming from the public information that was presented to the board over the last 2 years of meetings, and then specifically in the, I can show you, it's the Finance Committee report has, I would say,
Okay.
30 recommendations or something, and I think regularly they report on the status of those action items before the town meeting.
And I know that Alex said that he had the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah.
Let me ask, did you have the opportunity to have a discussion with the town manager or any of the other selectmen?
Okay, I sent
the extent of those discussions?
Yeah, sure, and I don't mean to interrupt you. I would say I'm an outsider when it comes to this public process. I can tell you, after all these years, this is the first time I've ever been in this room for an actual selectmen's meeting.
This is what the retirement board meetings are too.
Yeah, sure. So I was not sure that it was appropriate, quite frankly, to reach out to everybody until Mr. Vespoli called me, and then I said, okay, well, if talking is the right way to do it, then that's when I emailed the committee, and then soon after emailed Mr. Flanagan for his input, but the timing did not quite work with everybody else. So.
Okay, so you didn't have the opportunity to speak with the town manager?
No, this is the first time,
Okay.
except on
And as Alex Vespoli disclosed, I also was approached, I did offer, but I was approached by Mr. Workman and Mr. Stumpf. I did not hear from Mr. Turco, so we had brief conversations.
Yeah, I emailed, basically, after I spoke with Mr. Vespoli, you all get the standard email, and with the hope that we could touch base and find out what the, if there was any more, other than the short public interview, any more detail I can give you.
Sure.
And just to kind of weigh in on that, I'd never spoken to Mr. Workman or Mr. Turco prior to my phone calls to them when I saw they were candidates.
Okay, anything further? Board?
That's a good, so that's a good point. I know that, Mr. Workman, I didn't recognize your name at all, so I never had the opportunity to speak with you. I recognized Mr. Turco's name, but had the opportunity to speak with him momentarily, really, related to another topic. Can I ask you the extent of, your relationship with all the members of the board? Have you had the opportunity prior to today or this whole interview process to discuss OPEB or the retirement board or issues going on in the retirement board?
So officially, what my only discussion with any members of the board I sent was about a year ago. I was a little upset, I would say at the time, about the fact that I had followed the OPEB process after moving to Andover. I had attended downstairs in the auditorium. There were some OPEB meetings where the board voted. That was the 3-2 vote to make changes to the OPEB rules. And then shortly thereafter, there was Senator L'Italien had worked with the legislature to effectively, in theory, overturn the work that the local OPEB committee had done. So I sent everybody on the board. So at that point, the board was the same makeup, except Ms. Gregory was not here. But Mr. Flanagan was. So I believe I just copied you. I sent my email directly to Senator L'Italien about how I felt she circumvented the process by going to the state level instead of letting our very local process go forward. So aside from that, no. I mean, I read the Townsman. It might be the first time my name's ever been on the front page, but yeah. So other than that, I follow it, and because I'm a financial person, it's a, I would say it's an issue that I take seriously.
So the answer to the question is you've had really no contact?
No, except for the emails that we had and discussions.
Right.
Specifically about.
I was just clarifying.
Yeah,
That's
sorry.
what I understood.
Yeah, no, I should have been more clear. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was filtering through.
Yeah.
I think I caught that in there somewhere. That's good. Anything else? We should move on to the next one if there.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time.
And I'll say it for the board, I know they feel the same way. Thank you for at least coming here, and I apologize certainly for the
I'm
late hour.
I'm a late person, so.
Yeah, but I don't like to be late.
The only
so-
challenge of the retirement board is that it meets in the morning, so.
I'm
Thank you so much.
very encouraged to see your name come up as, interest in this committee. I'd highly encourage everyone that we don't know to reach out to the town to try to find a nice match. So really, thank you for applying. It's great to see new names and, new opinions.
Great, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks so
Okay.
much.
All right.
We'll be in touch.
Okay. Okay.
Who's this next guy?
I did want to wait actually until he had left. I had, the last time the board went through an interview process, I believe Mr. Workman was interviewed, right? Was he interviewed last time?
No, we mean when Mr. Hart
No,
was
he's not. This
reappointed?
is his first time.
Oh, okay, all
He
right.
was not in the last batch of candidates.
All right, so I reached out to the town manager to see if I could get minutes from when those last interviews occurred, and as I understand, there were no minutes from that meeting. Alex, is that accurate? No minutes when When, did you and Alex interview?
Alex and I were the subcommittee for
Right.
the retiree appointment when Mr. Hartwell was reappointed.
So
So I don't know, there was no one in the room to take minutes, so I
Well,
assume there were no minutes.
We're
taken.
supposed to
Well,
take minutes, but we.
Yeah, no.
we
As
never
a,
do, so.
as a subcommittee, it's very important that subcommittees' meetings were publicly posted, or was that, was it publicly posted when you?
The
interviewed?
meeting was publicly posted, and
Okay.
we had it in the other room. It wasn't televised. We had at least one person sit in, a member of the retirement board. But I wasn't aware we had to take minutes, and we
Oh,
certainly
yeah,
didn't. We
no,
did the
it's-
interviews. Did the zoning board of appeals subcommittee take minutes?
We did not take minutes either.
They didn't take minutes
No,
either.
no.
We were
but-
right across the room from each
Yeah,
other.
no,
Dan is correct.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to clarify this with everyone.
Okay.
Subcommittees.
Technically, we're supposed to
Because
take
Okay.
I went
I wasn't
looking,
aware of that.
I went looking for the minutes just to try to better understand, and sorry to take this up when you're coming in, John.
Who are you?
I went looking for the minutes from when the prior subcommittee interviewed candidates, and there were none. And I was quite disappointed that there weren't any minutes. And every board member should know, subcommittees, which are public bodies, need to take minutes.
Duly noted.
So-
Very hard to conduct an interview and take minutes at the same time.
Well, no, even writing up minutes, post,
After.
after the fact. So,
Hi, John.
Good evening.
Welcome. Thank you so much for, I know you thought you got out, but now you're back here throwing your hat into another politically charged committee, shall I say, because the last one certainly was. So. Well, we started out with the last candidate by just telling you a little bit about yourself. We obviously know a lot about you. You've been around town for a long time. You served many years on the FinCom. Tell us a little about yourself, what you believe your qualifications are, and why would you want to do this? I mean, and it's a good question, by the way.
Well, look, background on myself, I grew up right outside of St. Louis, Missouri, in Kirkwood, Missouri. Went to school at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and moved to Andover in 1987 to start the Enterprise Rent-A-Car subsidiary. Was with them for 16 years, and then moved into the healthcare field. My first job out of school was in the healthcare field, and moved back into the healthcare field where I've been ever since. As far as why I'm interested in this position, I knew when I finished my time on the finance committee that I would be drawn back in some capacity. I just wasn't sure what that was, and this just happened to become available. And the reason primarily why I'm interested in it is because I really enjoy Andover. I enjoy what everyone has done previously, the retirees who have worked in Andover to build it to be the great community that it is, and those who are working today to continue making Andover a great place to live. And so we have a challenges with the retirement, and retirement is a big part of compensation, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity of working to address the problem that we have. And I'm married, have 2 kids. Both of the kids are finished with school. One's married, lives in North Andover, one lives in Boston.
Great. We're kind of going to go around the room and see if we have questions. I'm sure we do. Bob?
Thank you. Yeah, same question to start. Mr. Stumpf, thank you for applying for the position. My question is, how, you've been in the finance committee for a long time, so you're familiar with what's going on. How would you assess, financially speaking, the current condition of Andover's retirement system?
It's not in good shape, and there needs to be dramatic change. And I think the single most important issue is getting the board to be working collaboratively with the board members to try to identify a solution, because the reality is it's a 5-member board, and there needs to be some form of agreement on something before it's going to go forward. And I try to work with everyone who is supportive of certain ideas and understand what their thought processes are, and share my ideas, whether it's about the discount rate, whether it's about eligibility issues that certain employees may have that we may need to take a second look at, and most importantly, to make sure that we talk to the town manager and the superintendent to understand what their thoughts are about the town of Andover as a whole, so that the retirement board can make an informed decision. Because it wouldn't be wise for the retirement board to make a decision to double the appropriation for retirement next year. It just would mean tremendous reductions in services and things like that. So I think we need to make sure that we understand what the town manager and the superintendent have, what their ideas and thoughts are, so we can make informed decisions on the retirement board.
Good. Dan, you
I'll reserve my right to listen and go last.
this isn't Monopoly, you don't just skip a turn. Alex?
Yeah, John, thanks for applying for us, and just curious to know what if you were to be on the committee, and what your highest priority or priorities would be if selected.
Yeah, well, obviously with the 48% funding, it's an enormous challenge, and there's only 17 years left to provide the funding for that. So how we would address that, the discount rate, the fact that we have one discount rate on the town's books and we have a different discount rate on the retirement board's books, I think is something that would definitely need to be discussed. And the biggest thing, I think, is just to talk about a plan, and a 3 or 4 year plan, so that we can have something so that the town manager and superintendent know long-term, relatively 3 or 4 years, how to plan the budgets and how to plan if there's a need for possibly an override to educate the voters of the community about the big picture of the town, and then how the retirement board plans to impact what decisions are going to be made at the town and school levels, because the retirement board's decisions are in that rectangular box, and that impacts the money that's left over for the other departments. But the biggest thing, I think, would be working to get a collaborative working relationship with all 5 board members as best we could.
Okay, thank you, John.
Laura?
How do you, what mechanisms or steps would you take to try and get the board to work collaboratively? Because I think that's a problem on the retirement board, and we've been having issues in town with civility and getting people to volunteer for positions, and we need to be able to work together in many different capacities in town. And how, you said twice that that was one of the things you wanted to work towards. What would you do?
Well, I first would want to understand the other board members' views and why they support those views, because I wouldn't be in a very good position to try to sway someone one way or the other without fully understanding what their view is and why they have that view. And then perhaps try to educate them. Let's just say, for example, my view might be different, to try to explain my view to see if I could get them to understand my view, and then work to come to some balancing.
What do you see as your duty or charge on the retirement board if you were to get the position?
Well, I think it's very clear that solely for the beneficiaries and the participants, the members of the retirees and existing employees. That's the purpose of the retirement board member and the retirement board.
And how would you act in that role? Like, what, you sort of repeated the charge. How would you do it? What would be your thought process in going into things? How would you protect the retirees?
Well, I would want to make sure that everyone understands that retirement is just one portion of compensation. And as a finance committee, we've been trying to share that communication for a good period of time. So educating those members so that they know that the retirement is just one facet of their compensation, of active employees, and then explaining that we can't continue, we're on an unsustainable path right now with compensation as a whole. And therefore, we need to look at options about how we can make changes that would lower the unfunded obligation, and then also set the path in place similar to what Andover has done with health insurance recently for going forward to how to mitigate the increases in certain benefits and or therefore compensation as a whole. And I would imagine that that would get into the dollars that can be allocated to the town and school operating budgets after the retirement and other items within that healthcare, the rectangular box were funded, and then the superintendent and the town manager would have X amount of dollars left over to spend on their departments. And the single largest piece of that is salaries. And so that would obviously, I would want the town manager and the superintendent to get their thoughts and ideas before the retirement board would make a decision.
Yeah, I'm done.
So, let me the thought came up while you were saying that obviously you would benefit the town greatly because of your big picture view of the finances of the town. That last statement a little bit went off the rails a little bit for what a retirement board member should be. And I'm interested to know what your, how you would use, and it is a double-edged sword, and use the knowledge that you have of the town while staying within the lanes of what the retirement board responsibilities are.
Well, again, it's back to the retirement board can make decisions on its own. And I think it's important for the retirement board to have an understanding of what impact those decisions have. And that would be whether we were 85% funded or whether we're 48% funded. I think it's important for someone who's a board that's making decisions, looks and understands the impact that board's decision will have elsewhere. And because we're in such a position where we have such an enormous unfunded obligation, there's going to have to be some pretty dramatic changes. And I think it's important to understand, for example, what the town manager's appetite is for risk. Because if our asset allocation has a lot of risk into it and the returns don't come through, and we only have 17 years left to provide the funding under what our current 2032 fully funded plan is, well, if those risky returns don't come through, then either we have to make a change and move it from 32 to 40, but at some point, the town is the one who's going to have to make up the difference, and it would be something that impacts the other areas within the town if the retirement allocation doubled or tripled or something to that effect in order to provide the funding that's needed. So it wasn't that I would do anything to impact those other departments, but simply make sure that the retirement board listened to the town manager and the superintendent as far as what impact the retirement board's decisions might have.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out to me today, John. I listened to your voicemail. I think it was around 6:30, actually. I asked the prior candidate a very similar question, which is, it was related to how you know so much about the OPEB, and I understand how you know so much about OPEB, but let me ask you, when or how much reach out to members of this board, the town manager, members of the existing retirement board? Who did you reach out to? Who did you speak to? What was the extent of your conversations to the pool of knowledge?
Regarding health insurance?
Just regarding OPEB, or regarding the responsibilities of the retirement board position.
Oh, responsibilities of the retirement board position?
Yeah. To research and in essence prepare for this culminating event.
Well, I reached out to a lot of people. I talked to Jimmy, David. I talked to Jimmy on Friday to get his views. I spoke with.
For those of you who don't know, he's the chair of the retirement board.
I spoke with Tom last week sometime. Spoke to Andrew, obviously, and I didn't have a chance to speak with the finance committee liaison for the retirement board. I reached out to, because she obviously would be a valuable resource of information. I didn't have a chance to talk to Joanne Martin, who was liaison for the retirement board. I spoke to Alex, and I spoke with Paul and I spoke with Bob.
What would you say the resounding, was there any commonality in what you heard from all those people that you spoke to?
Well, everyone thankfully recognized there was a problem that needs to be addressed, and again, I had one-on-one conversations, not sharing any information with what I spoke with one candidate to another candidate. Funding came up as, Jimmy obviously thought that there would need to be additional funding, and obviously with 48% additional funding would be one source that we would need to look at. The asset allocation and the risk factor in our current portfolio, it was an item that was brought up, and just overall getting the board to work together, sharing information and talking just openly and honestly about the challenges and the issues that we face and options that we might propose or think about going forward to address the issue.
Thank you. Any further?
I just wanted, John, I think you accurately said we're on an unsustainable path. And you talked about funding, but I'm curious, what specific reforms, if any, do you think that ought to be considered so that we get on a more sustainable path?
Well, funding's just one option, obviously. I think the eligibility for benefits is something that we definitely would need to look at. That would have probably a fairly significant impact. I think, and I believe that compensation as a whole includes retirement and other benefits, and so I would think that we would need to look at a plan that would be probably a 3-year plan to make an incremental increase in funding in, let's say, the next 2 years, slightly, so it's not going to be too large of an increase, but begin increasing the appropriation, but with the message that in year 4, when the next compensation change from a contract negotiation comes into play, so that if the retirement board makes a decision to make a substantial change 3 years from now, then the town manager and the superintendent have knowledge of that in advance. And we would want to talk to the town manager and the superintendent and get their feedback. I would recommend that the retirement board, if I'm fortunate to be elected, would have that back and forth dialogue over the course of the next 2 or 3 years.
Alex, anything further?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, I asked the last candidate this. It is a very somewhat politically charged position because you will be lobbied by many groups in town and other individuals in town who have obviously a specific interest. What are your feelings on how you would be able to withstand that and be an individual making your own decisions and not having to fall to the to the decisions of others or the lobbying of others? How do you feel about that?
I think that's what I've been doing for 35 years. I mean, people are going to offer you something, and you just can't take it. So it's something that I'm used to. I'm fully aware of all the obligations that being part of a board is, and so I couldn't tell you what they all are right now. But the packet that Elena sent me has a lot of paperwork in there as far as compliance and all of that. So it's I think I don't want to say it's really not that hard. You just say, boy, thank you very much for the offer, for that free trip to Europe for 3 weeks with my wife, and but I'm sorry, I can't take it.
It has to be $49 or under.
So,
Yeah, obviously individuality and making, and we've all known you a long time and know that you are that kind of person, but it needs to be said in public that it is you'd be getting lobbied. And there's a fine line between gathering information and being lobbied. So you have to take that information and try to be an individual. So
right.
I wanted to hear your reaction to it, and I did. Thank you. Anything else from the board? Good? Thank you, John.
Thank you for your time.
Most appreciate your wanting to do this.
And thank you to Elena for sending a nice packet to each of the candidates so that they can understand the responsibilities of the job.
You leave? Oh.
Maybe here's how much left.
You go to North Reading? Mr. Turco, thank you so much for coming.
My God, I'm 66 and it's,
You turned 67, right?
what was he dragging it out for? I was like, Eddie Haskell was running the show.
Good old Eddie.
Oh my God.
You gotta love a meeting that you have to shave twice during the meeting because it took so long.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't want you to have another birthday in there. And
I didn't need
and I
glasses
apologize.
before
I apologize for you being a couple of hours late, so. But I think you sat through a little bit of that meeting, and you know what, sometimes things just,
I'm gonna keep you guys till 3.
yeah, that's okay. We might just keep you till 3.
Ah, let me tell you, I'll be fast asleep.
Well, let's open by just, if you could just summarize some of your background, and most importantly, tell us why would you want to do this? And,
You know,
it's an important.
it was important to me. I retired about 8 years ago, and I started doing some volunteer work in Boston. I'm on the executive board for Mass Retirees. I was volunteering up at the MSPCA.
Oh, really?
Great, it's great therapy. You can save a fortune on a psychiatrist with a dog, trust me. They never disagree with you, they're always happy to see you.
Chairman keeps suggesting I get one,
I know.
so there must be something to it.
I just got one, and they're
gonna chip
pretty
in.
good. He's a good guy.
They're great, I had one for 14 years, and it killed me. I said I'd never get another one. 2 years goes by, I got another one. Beautiful.
So tell us a little bit about your qualifications, please.
Well, I have a pretty diverse, what I feel, qualifications. I was on the Governor's Pension Reform Committee a couple of years ago.
How'd that work out for you?
How'd it work out for us? We had great ideas. Where are they? You know what happens. They get stopped. But you have to have the fortitude to do it too, you know? I mean, if the politicians don't have the fortitude to follow through and do what's right for the state and the community, then who's running the show? Okay? I was the vice president of the State Police Union, so I've dealt with labor for a long time. I know how to talk to people in unions. I know how to give them the respect. The most important thing, I think, and this is where everything starts with me, was business. I started 7 years old working on my grandfather's farm. And from there, I ended up with 53 different businesses. I've owned...
Couldn't hold down a job?
Couldn't hold down a job. I've owned 2 newspapers, I've owned a chain of restaurants, a chain of hair salons, a chain of gas stations. It was the 70s, it was wild. But I loved it. I loved it because you were in control. You know, it's not like government where you got to deal here and here and here. This is much more complex.
How does this qualify you to be on this board?
Which part? Business?
All of what you just said. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, business is exactly how I think I would conduct myself when I would make a decision. I'm not going to be on somebody's team. And if that's what we're looking for, I'm not going to be on somebody's team. I'm going to listen to every argument, and every decision I make will be based on fiscal responsibility and math. 1 and 1 has to equal 2. If somebody's telling you 1 and 1 equals 3, and you're buying it, then I don't know what to tell you. You know, we're in some trouble right now with our retirement board. And we have to develop a path to getting out of it. And if we don't start that path, then you're headed to another Puerto Rico. You know, it's just gonna blow up. Everybody thought Puerto Rico bonds were the thing to have. Well, they stopped paying interest. It was our government that rated them AA, which is the second highest out there. It was our government who said, matter of fact, we're gonna make it better for you. You're not gonna have to pay state interest if you buy Puerto Rico bonds. And now they're worth nothing. Number one held bond in the United States for retirees for alternative revenue sources. So you gotta pay attention. You know, I guess recently you changed, or you went into a more aggressive funds for the retirement board. I heard that someplace. You know, history teaches you everything, anything, enslaved. We're ready for another correction. Every time we get up here, and you can't figure out why, you see a correction. And you're gonna see another correction. You know, you could, if you were dead set on investing, hold back half, wait for that bubble, look at a timetable, you have all that extra money. As soon as it did go into a bubble, you buy low. You cost average.
Okay, so let's go around the board a little bit and see if we have some questions for the board members. Bob?
Mr. Turco, welcome. Thank you for applying for the position. We didn't have a chance to speak before this meeting, although a mutual friend did call me and said what a great guy you are. So that's the only contact we've had.
I paid.
I'd like to start off with the same. Well, actually, I'd like to borrow Dan's question real quickly. Can you describe the extent of the contact you've had with any board members prior to this interview?
Andrew, I had a meeting with, and that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Nobody else that you met to prepare for
I
this
talked to Mr.
Spoley?
over the phone.
Okay.
And
Alex is here.
Yeah, he's right there. He's right there.
Okay.
I'm here.
It's kind of quiet.
Here, I'm watching.
He got short.
You know?
All right, great. Well, I'd like to ask you the same question I've asked the other candidates, which is, how would you assess the current financial condition of Andover's retirement system with, you know, as much detail as you could fill in from what you've done in your research to prepare for
Well,
it?
1 to 10? 4.9. Because that's what we have in funding is, what are we, 47.9 money to pay for our retirement fund. That's awful. That's awful. We're one of the lowest funded boards in the state. That's why I say we have to have a path to correct that. And we have to have a board that are all conducting themselves as one.
And can I just follow up while we're on that,
Sure.
say, the current condition, because a lot of that's driven by the discount rate that's chosen. How would you describe the significance of the discount rate that's selected? And secondarily, a two-part question. Why do you think pension boards in general are always picking high discount rates?
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't investigated it.
Just your general perception? Why
You know,
is
if you look at the state, it's not that far off what we are.
Right, but a higher, more optimistic discount rate kind of understates the liability, correct?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you.
Okay.
What would you say, based on your observations of the retirement board, retirement system, what would you categorize maybe as your two highest priorities, so to speak, should you be appointed to the position?
My highest priority would be making sure that the retirees currently and future would be served in the best capacity that I could. And second, I'd do that by, first of all, finding a road to raise our funding for the board. I mean, our funding is at 47.9?
41.
40. You know, there's a way of getting there. There's a way of getting there, but I mean, it's not going to be done overnight. It's not going to be done overnight, and I'm okay with that. But let's get on the path. Let's figure out what we're going to do. Are we going to increase our contributions? We're not going to invest our way out of it. That's my own. I don't think we're going to invest our way out of it. You know, you have to look at contributions. You have to look at some other hard issues, but you're going to have to fund that pension. It has to start going in an upward motion. I don't care how long it takes. You know, somebody said 10 years from now we're going to be looking at 300 million. You just can't do it at this rate. You have to make some changes. You have to look at pension reform. You have to sit down in a room and have everybody in the room and have everybody that's on the board sit there and come up with ideas of how we're going to do it. And there'll be a way to get there. There is a way to get there. There will be a way to get there. Everybody isn't going to be happy about it, but you got to have the fortitude to do it, because in the end, it's going to be the right decision for the members, and that's who we should be looking at.
I just have one question. Earlier you said something about not being part of a team, and I'm wondering, or maybe I misunderstood, but I'm wondering how you would see your role with the other members of the board and how you would work with them to...
I would work with them probably, in my opinion, because I've been on other boards, to be on a team. That means it's a 3-2 split, or you know, I watch some of the meetings. You know, I'm not going to be on a team. I'm going to listen. I don't want to be affiliated. I don't want people to say, oh, you're with him and him, or you're with him. No, I'm with the person that makes the most sense with this particular problem. It may be you this week, it may be you next week. And as soon as you have established yourself like that, then people begin to respect you more. They know that they're not going to be walking into a meeting and it's cut and dry. Oh, he's going to vote this way because he's with this one and that one. So don't even talk. No, that's not who I am. I can, you know, I'm perfectly content sitting here and discussing a problem. and I will justify it to you. I'm not going to just vote for something because I'm the third person on the team. Sorry. That's just,
Bob, Madam Chair?
I've got it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alex.
Uh-oh.
You're not right in front
Thank
of me,
you.
Alex, I'm so sorry.
no refreshments, nothing, no. Pillow, anything?
Pizza and hot dogs.
I'm starved. Put the old guy
Dan,
on
thanks. Dan, thanks for your time on the phone and putting your hat in the ring. You mentioned that you were on a committee to talk about pension reform. Can you, and it sounds like politically it didn't happen, but can you point to one of the reforms that was suggested or advocated that you agreed with, that you'd put as the, kind of the top reform measure that, ultimately wasn't adopted, but that you thought was worthwhile?
Well, I thought increasing the retirement age, increasing the contribution.
The contribution by whom?
By the employees. There was talk about going to civil service. That I wasn't a civil service supporter. I thought that we had a pretty good plan and we had control of it. So once we have control of it, that's it. It's our responsibility. So we don't want to give that away to somebody else, because then you lose everything.
Bob?
Okay,
Alex, you done?
thank you.
I'm sorry. You done, Alex?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah, no, I was just, I guess it's, Alex kind of took some of that question, which is being on the reform board before, but I guess I'll pivot off that to your role in the Mass Retirees Executive Board. What, if any, reforms or compromises have been discussed at Mass Retirees in recognition that the system is unsustainable at national, state, and local level? What, other than asking communities to put more money, what sacrifices would Mass Retirees support that you would also endorse to preserve and protect the current and future retirees?
Well, I think, basically, I told you that it would, for me, it would be a contribution.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the Mass Retirees, your role on the executive board.
My role on
And
the
Mass
executive
Retirees
board.
represents the retirees, so I'm just curious from that
Right.
perspective, as an executive board member, what conversations have happened? Would the Mass Retirees, as representative retirees, recognize as needed reforms that you would also endorse in order to save the system? Because as you said, we can't invest our way out of this, right?
We cannot.
Nor would I suggest, can we fund our way out of it?
Right.
So reforms have to happen. So as your role as an executive board member, Mass Retirees, what reforms would you advocate for and support that have...
Well, I'd advocate for a higher retirement age.
We can't control that though at the local level, that's a state issue, right?
Okay, but we
It's a
can,
state issue, yeah.
we
At
can-
the local level, at the retirement board. The things within the control of the local retirement board.
you know, we ask them to pay more for their health insurance.
You're referring to retiree health insurance?
Right.
But your organization opposed our reform.
You gotta remember
Right.
about my organization. We have one meeting a year with the executive board. And then it's a close-knit group of people. We're not that involved, you know, which is, trust me, I feel the same way, okay? So, I mean, there's things that are going on that I found out the other night talking to somebody that I wasn't even aware of.
Okay.
So we're very,
We're straying a little bit.
Yeah, we are. Just getting back to the question though of reforms that you know the reform, you know the levers you can pull as a member of the local retirement board. Which of those would you support?
Give
Not
me-
things at state level, things that you can control. You're familiar with what you can control at the local level, correct?
You tell me, no, I'm not.
Oh,
Go ahead.
well, I mean, they are eligibility and, cost of living adjustments and what have you,
Yes.
so.
Oh. Once again, when we're talking about anything, my position would be, where's the money? Where's the money? You want to sell me something, where's the money coming from? All right? I mean, everybody has great ideas. I think we should, raise the rent here. But the money's got to be coming from someplace. You have to be able to sit down and analyze every individual segment of reform.
I just have one last final question. Of the three candidates, you're the only candidate that is a public retiree receiving a pension from the state.
Yeah.
As a member of the retirement board, you may be put in a position where you would have to decide on things like coal and other things. So how would you deal with that if you are in a position to have to support reforms when you yourself would not be subject to those reforms? Would you see any potential conflict or challenge in doing that?
I'm here to do a job. I'm here to do a job. You present a scenario that's pertinent to a board that I'm on. I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to analyze that question. I'm going to say, what will this do to the budget? Is this going to increase the 47 or is it going to decrease it? We can't go any lower. If we go backwards, we have to start going up. Okay, there's going to be some hard calls. People aren't going to like it.
Okay, just a question for Andrew. Andrew, there's certain criteria about the fifth member in terms of, can't be an official of the government, can't be a retiree. It's a retiree at the municipal level, is that correct?
Correct, so I believe you're a retiree of a
State.
agency.
Right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure Mr. Turco is not disqualified because of those fifth member criteria.
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Alex, anything further?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Laura?
No.
Good. Bob, Dan?
All set.
I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Turco.
It's only 11 o'clock.
Well, the pizza, I figure after you leave, we'll have the pizza party.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, lady, get it.
Oh, it's late. I'm old.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your interest.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Take care.